So, Alexander, you have, I would say, a lot of experience helping SaaS companies build out their revenue function. And I would kind of like to start our conversation today talking a bit more about, building and scaling up the team, kind of starting from scratch and like how you would approach that. So maybe we should just start there. Like if you were a B2B SaaS company, you do not have a RevOps function today, like how would you build and scale out that team from the beginning?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I actually had the challenge or the opportunity twice to actually build RevOps teams from scratch in my previous employments. And I've done it now with several customers on the side. There are, I think, always more or less the common pitfalls, and it depends a little bit on the state of your company, because actually RevOps is not a function like sales that you do need to have from the beginning, right? It's not a day one function, and it's also not like marketing, for instance, where it's very, very clear for everyone from the beginning what are they supposed to deliver. And at the same time, when a company already has, let's say 1,000 employees, there are still companies that do not have a function that at least they call RevOps. And of course, at the same time, some of these, functions or some of the tasks that RevOps is doing already exist in those companies. But when looking at a very, very small company and when building up a RevOps team really from scratch, I think the most important thing is to focus on what helps you to, make the processes for you and for your customers the easiest as possible. And that, for the biggest part, is usually to focus really on the operations side, to get somebody on board who is tool savvy, who is owning the CRM, because that's actually often one of the biggest or first symptoms that many companies feel when they don't have a function they call RevOps, that nobody truly owns the CRM, right? And I know you worked for HubSpot, so you probably know what it looks like, right? If there are 1,000 different fields and 10 of them have the same meaning and nobody really knows the structure, basically super hard to do anything with the data in the end, right? And it's also super painful for AEs, it's super painful for CS, and eventually for steering the whole company. And I think that's just the most obvious symptom, but I think there are many, many other things where this comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like what you mentioned there as well. Like it's very common that we see that as well, that it's someone just gets thrown at, you've done a little bit of HubSpot before, or Salesforce from before because you were a sales rep. And that means that all of a sudden you know how to structure a CRM for scale, which I don't necessarily believe that is true. I definitely had no clue how to build out a CRM when I was a sales rep and started my first kind of agency side role. Like that was not a correlation there. So I think what you mentioned there, like you see that a lot, that there's just someone who's doing a little bit as a side thing and then they scale up and it becomes kind of a bigger and bigger problem. And in the end, after a couple of years, that person leaves. No one has a clue what's going on. And things start breaking. And that is when companies typically would start, you know,
Correct.
doing a little bit more RevOps. At least in my experience, that's a very common, and it's very difficult because you're repairing a plane midair at that point in time versus, doing a little bit of proper groundwork. So when do you think it's the right time? Because of course you shouldn't build massive systems if you're just, five people. It's like get stuff done, sell something, get a little bit of product market fit. But like when should you go from being reactive to actually thinking about RevOps and, building that out and setting some more structure to it?
Yeah. Mm, I think that's always a very individual question that depends a lot on the specific company. But let me briefly come back also to the comment that you just made, right? If you've seen a little bit about CRM, if you've worked with HubSpot or Salesforce, whatever before, and you're the one person that's supposed to be in charge, you're probably not the one that's really gonna, as you say, help the CRM be ready for scale and help the whole revenue operations being ready for scale, because I don't want to limit RevOps here with the tool side. But I think, and that's also what I'm telling my customers and the startups that I advise, I think it's better than not having somebody, right? If you have a tool savvy person on your team that feels accountable, that feels responsible for it, it's probably way better than like kicking it around like a hot potato, right? Because I mean, usually the first RevOps person is the CEO. That's usually the person that has inherently the most interest in structured data, that knows the processes, that tells about the processes to other people, that leverages the data and eventually uses it to train other people. And that, by the way, are the three areas of revenue operations that I just mentioned: operations, analytics, and enablement. And therefore, you always do have RevOps, as I said, very from the start. But when is it actually time to build up that function? Depends. I've spoken to companies, and I've actually did a little summary on that and survey on this over the last couple of months. There are companies that start to have a dedicated function with as early as 15 people. There are very, very good companies that already have it when they are around, or only have it when they are around 40 people. And typically, I think the number is around 100, it's like somewhere between 70 and 130, that companies really set up a dedicated team around revenue operations. So the example that I mentioned earlier with companies at 1,000 employees not having RevOps is, at least in the SaaS world, not very common anymore. Especially not in the US and Europe, a little bit more, but I think all young companies, they do employ it earlier. And at 70 to 130, there's actually also a natural reason why that is the case, that RevOps is needed. Because if you look at, and that's actually science, what the perfect human organization looks like, it's around about 120 people, right? And that's where you still know everyone, you know what everyone is doing, you know whom you need to talk to if you want something. And that is, for me, one of the reasons why RevOps actually comes then into the game. You need actually a dedicated function that connects all these dots, right, around the revenue organization. And when companies are around 70 people, they are usually already mature enough to have processes that are repeatable, that are scalable. And that's why this is usually a good number where people should, or companies should, actually think, yes, I now need somebody to do this. But there are different options to leverage also the potentials of this functions earlier if you want.
Yeah, 15 people. Like is that a European company or American company?
That's a French company, actually.
Oh, wow.
Somebody who's founded before, and he said, well, for me, processes are so important, right? If I don't set up my tools in a good way, if I don't make good use of it, but everyone uses whatever, and if I don't use my CRM in a smart way, then I don't have good data to convince my investors, then I make it harder for me to set up processes later on. And I think that was actually a very, very interesting thought for me, because I also thought, hey, that's very early. And of course, he didn't get somebody on board who was like super experienced, right? 10 years in RevOps. He got in somebody who was rather junior, who he saw the potential in, but he called that person junior RevOps manager and said, hey, it's your responsibility and you will take care of it. So I think it was a very, very interesting way, and it worked out for him.
I mean, I can definitely see, especially if you are planning on scaling quite aggressively and you actually can say with some confidence that within the next year and a half, we're actually expecting significant growth. I would say that is probably a case where I would really consider it, even if you're smaller. But of course, if you're 15 people now and you're going to be 15 people in 3 years, it might be, well, hire another sales rep might actually be the higher impact there. But I really personally like the idea of starting early, as long as you have some processes in place that you know works.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what I always also tell startups, like if you're thinking of getting this person on board or getting actually a dedicated RevOps function, consider if there are other ways for you to fix it first before you employ a full person, right? Because I mean, at this 15 or 20 people company, it's a significant part of your payroll, right? And there are other options like getting somebody as an advisor on the side, right? And that's actually what I would suggest companies, because um, I think it makes sense to build stuff internally, right? Don't have like a agency set up everything for you, because that makes it also way more difficult in the end, and also especially exactly. Exactly. And especially in the early days, right? When you want to adopt your processes quickly, when you're still learning, when you haven't found the exact PMF, and then rather get somebody on board. There are hundreds of people out there that have done it before. Try to engage with them, try to call them and ask them for advice, right? And just maybe do that once a month, or do that whenever it's needed for you in the beginning. I think that's always a suggestion that I could give to companies.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. And like, they're like, yeah, having a RevOps person on the team before you kind of know the processes. Also at HubSpot, we had so many customers who purchased HubSpot, but they didn't really know why. They just knew like, we are gonna have a CRM. Okay, so what are you gonna do with it? Like, sales. But there isn't really. So it's like kind of what you mentioned in the beginning there, that RevOps and a lot of things, it's not just about the tool. Um, if you have bad processes, like no tool, or it can help you probably, but it's not going to solve your problems. It got to start with, having the right people, having the right processes, and then you can pick the technology for, you know, the stuff you actually need at that stage.
Absolutely. I mean, a system is always just a picture of your processes that you already have in place, right? And a process at the simplest possible description is actually something that you can repeat, right? A way that you can explain to somebody in the future. You don't have to have it like super well documented, right? On a process map. Just have a rough understanding. Step one, step two, step three, just like you would explain it to somebody else. And if you have that, then it's time to implement a system. But again, let's not stick too long around on the system side, because otherwise I think we draw the picture for our listeners that RevOps is truly only about the, well, tool side of things. A big part of it is, but not everything.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like what you touched on before as well there. Like, it's really kind of connecting various different departments and kind of helping sales, service, customer success, and a lot of other functions to kind of go in the same direction, and making sure that we're not creating one big mess,
Correct. Yeah,
which might be okay in the
absolutely.
beginning, but maybe not too much as you. So one thing that we had a short conversation before, and we talked a bit about something you call the RevOps matrix, and I'm a big fan of those kind of different kind of matrices and kind of rules and structures that you can use to kind of think about stuff
Yeah.
in general. I think it helps a lot. So could you talk a bit more about like what is that RevOps matrix that you use, and what would be the key areas within that?
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. I think actually the reason why I developed it was to help myself. I didn't prepare it in the beginning to help anyone else with it. I was very egoistic about it. And I just, you just mentioned it. There are so many dots that you have to connect on the revenue operation side, that I needed a framework that helps me to understand what's the most important thing right now for us as a company, because especially in a startup and in a hypergrowth environment, things are always burning. You never know really where to start. And I had to come up with a framework for myself to help me prioritize it. And so I eventually developed what I call the revenue operations or RevOps assessment. And this matrix, as you said, is basically helping me to identify along the three different pillars: operations, analytics, and enablement, to understand what has actually for me right now the biggest impact as a company. If I improve it, where do I have to spend the most effort? And where is this on a, well, state from not existing at all to already perfectly or over engineered. And I use this in a very, very nice way. So I have basically descriptions for myself that I'm adjusting also over time, because process develops, sales develops and changes. And for each dimension, I have basically a description, worst in class / not existing, okay, and best in class. And basically, I've always changed this over time. I've adopted it also with the many customers that I've seen. And now it's kind of at a state where I have 36 different subgroups, and those 36 subgroups, I can always pick which one is the right one that's most important actually right now. So making a practical example, if you're, again, this 15-person company, you probably won't need to understand how well structured your deal desk is. But if you're like 1,000 or 10,000 employee company, that's actually then very, very interesting. What quotes am I sending out? Do they all look the same? And are they legally binding actually? And yeah, so that's kind of how I've been using it, how I've developed it. And happy to talk a little bit more about the details if you're interested.
Yeah, like please go ahead. So like you had the three groups there, ops, analytics, and enablement, and then you mentioned kind of a bunch of like, so if you go, would you go in there and like you're kind of helping, yeah, let's call it like the 7-person, like 70-person company or something like that. You would go
Yeah.
in there and kind of start with that audit. Is there some kind of self-assessments? Do you do kind of forms and surveys? Do you dig into the CRM? Do you talk to the reps? Or like, how would you go in and approach it? And what would you look for? That was a lot of questions in one. So, you know,
I think it's yeah, it's a little bit of all, right? It's like when I go into a company and I have a new customer, I can never do it myself, of course, right? So because what I always tell the people working in a company, you're the one who know your company the best, right? Don't engage somebody alone to do it for you. And eventually those frameworks are just basically the knowledge that somebody else has, and you're trying to internalize it. And so how it then usually goes is that you have this list, you talk to reps, you talk to finance, to any adjacent team, to marketing, to even product maybe, and try to depict, well, what's working well, what's not working so well. You try to group it. And eventually, after having several interviews, after looking also at the data, you look at very obvious CRM data, like does it exist? Do they have dashboards that are meaningful? Do they have maybe problems on the conversion at a certain funnel stage? And from that, you come up with this long list, and then you actually start to prioritize and to understand what's really making a difference for you as a company, and where do you need to focus. Maybe it becomes a little bit clearer if I go into one example. So business steering, for instance, is one thing, or individual performance management is for me a part that's very important. And it might be that you already have certain targets in the very beginning when you're a small company, but maybe those are changing over time, right? Like your company pivoted, and it doesn't make sense anymore to have the targets for your reps that you used to have in the past. And now you might say, oh yeah, that's obvious, but actually it's not. Many companies, they start with either a very sales-driven or a very marketing-driven approach. And eventually, as they, for instance, try to go up market, they try to be more sales-driven then. And then you also need to adjust the targets for the people for you working in sales. And I think that's just one of the parts where you need to understand where you're at right now, where do you want to be in the future, and how can you get there. And this matrix or this assessment actually helps you to get there.
how much there, like, do you think, because with that assessment, like how much focus is on kind of process alignment, and are the reps actually using the tool? Because I'm a big proponent of like really focusing a lot on, because if the team is not using the tools and the systems and everything properly, like it doesn't really matter. So you got to have that to have the reliable data and analytics and things like that. So how would you like? Let's actually rephrase it. Like, how would you think about that part, and how would you prioritize that part, the adoption bit of, the CRM use in as
Yeah.
a RevOps person?
Adoption is, I think, a very, very crucial point. And I think it's one of the reasons why you sometimes, if you're employed with a company, to take a step back and need to try to take the outsider perspective. Because when you're with a company, right, often people are saying, yeah, yeah, of course we have the system, right? We have a sales compensation system, and everyone can see their comp plans in there. But then it turns out that it's not user friendly at all. It's hardly being used by the reps. The reps are all keeping like a shadow list in Google Sheets or Excel where they are seeing their results. And that's not what you want as a company, right? You want them actually to use it. You want your reps to really understand the systems. And by the way, compensation is a very, very good example of it, where you truly want them to understand it, because otherwise they are not running in the right direction. And therefore, adoption for me is a very, very crucial part. And it's also one that differentiates good from best in class, because in best in class companies, the adoption also of those systems is always high, right? And you can actually easily see that. You can easily see that from login rates, from how often people get on the system, and also from the interviews. I think the qualitative part there is very, very important as well, that you speak to your reps and say, hey, how do you actually truly feel about this? Is this something that's helping you in your day-to-day, or is it not really worth the invest for the company?
How much would you like use because of course you can get adoption by, explaining to people, change management, focusing on the user's perspective and what they need. And you can also do, if you don't do this, then you don't get paid and stuff like that. Like, so you can really, as you said, you can really use the kind of like, or at least I believe that compensation is really great if you do it right, but it's also a lot of risk with it. But you can, of course, also use compensation and targets and all that kind of stuff to drive better adoption. And everywhere I worked, it's always been a little bit of a whip and a little bit of the kind of carrot, so to say, when it comes to that use and potentially impacting the compensation or your targets and rewards and commissions and things like that. Like, what are your thoughts around like using like that kind of things, like KPIs and compensation as a kind of to drive adoption? Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
For adoption of systems, not really a big fan, right? Like, don't force somebody to use it. Actually, the tool should be there to help the people. I think it's more about enablement, it's more about communication, presenting to somebody why the system actually helps them. And often that's where most companies fail, that they think, oh yeah, we rolled out the system, but they never actually rolled it out to their teams, because their teams never really understood how to work with it. And one thing that I always have in mind when it comes to that is this one sentence: there is no such thing as over communication. There is no such thing as over communication when it comes to revenue operations, when it comes to rolling out new tools. You need to ensure that everyone really is aware, even the last person on the team, and also those people that were on vacation. And to come back to your question, am I a fan of this? Using KPIs to drive system adoption. Do use the KPIs, right? Again, look at the login rates, look at if fields are filled out, if they are filled out correctly, but ensure that, the data eventually is correct, right? And that's where I'm a fan of, again, considering at least to use a KPI also in the compensation. Like, if you only have stuff in your CRM that you don't want to have in there, then yeah, there might be a reason for your reps to have a slight decrease in their compensation due to that. But again, that depends a lot on the company. That depends a lot on trust, right? You don't want to start with distrust in the company, because I think you should always start with expecting that people do their job right.
And they want to do their
And
job good. You gotta
exactly,
assume that it's
exactly.
yeah, because I think
So
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I think it feels like a lot of companies like it's really exactly what you said. You build it out, and then when you've done the structure, well, we're done now. And
Yeah,
the kind of part where you actually train the team, well, like they just have to, and if they don't use it, the sales reps or the marketing team doesn't get it. And it's like
yeah,
you would never, if you build a product, you wouldn't go and say, well, okay, maybe you would, but I don't think it's a good business approach to go and say, well, our customers don't understand our products and they don't want to use it and it's their fault.
exactly. Right.
But
You would never go and say, oh, by the way, customer, you need to pay now more because you're not using the product.
yeah,
You want them to pay more because they understand the product,
that
right?
would be an interesting approach. I haven't thought about that. That's a really good analogy.
And yeah, I think it's very, very crucial to drive this adoption part and to really focus on it. And that's not only on the tool sides, that's also on the analytics side. That's on the enablement. If you're big enough, if you have a sales trainer, if you have a coach, try to get from your reps feedback of how well is it working, right? And that's a very, very easy thing that I've done in the past. We've implemented a CRM happiness survey. We asked our reps quarterly or half yearly, hey, evaluate your CRM. How helpful is it to you? Does it save you time? What's the most bothersome thing for you? And ensure that your RevOps people are spending time with the customer facing people. And one thing I think, AI is everywhere. I think we can't have a podcast without AI right now. One of the things that actually does help there is generative AI when it comes to or conversational AI when it comes to understanding what your reps are spending their time with. So in that case, that they are looking at the outputs of the calls, right? In the past, for a RevOps team to listen to 10 customer calls, honestly, it could easily be more than a quarter of work, because you need to find a rep who wants you to attend the call. You need to find a conversation in the right language and blah, 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 all that stuff. And now with conversational AI, super handy tool to understand, are your reps using your system in the right way? Are they asking the right questions? Are they putting in the right pain points into the CRM? And get a better understanding of how the communication between reps and customers actually really goes. Sorry that I took it a little bit away, but I think that's just so crucial that you find ways for your revenue operations team to be close to your customers and to the everyday work of the reps.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely like I haven't actually thought about the call recording. I would just like the kind of can we just have a 15-20 minute screen share when you just walk me through, you come in the morning, what is the stuff you're doing and like what is your workflow, just to kind of understand, because that really, it's like that's why I'm such a big fan as well of treating the CRM like as one of the company's products and thinking about it in that way. You have the sales reps is a customer, and you need to understand how that customer is using the tool. Do they get value from the tool? And then, as you said, like having maybe surveys and some KPIs to get the kind of quantitative. And then you would also have the qualitative stuff by just talking to people, just like you should talk to customers every now and then, like how are you using our products and things like that. But
Yeah, absolutely. Like spend time with them, ask them, what does your day look like? How do you fill this out? How do you use your reports that you have on your dashboard, for
do you know where they
instance, right?
are?
Yeah, do you know
Probably
where they
don't
are?
even, a lot of them.
Oh
They
yeah,
know how to
when
make one.
just recently I had this example with a customer where some of their sales leaders actually complained that they don't have this dashboard um, for the target achievements and for what each rep gets paid. And I realized, well, this person didn't even have access. Somebody forgot to set them up
Mm.
for the sales compensation tool, and yeah, just spend time with them, right? As you said.
So one thing that is like it's a little bit tied to, you mentioned you did the kind of surveys on maybe quarterly, half year basis, like trying to understand people. Like One thing that I think a lot would kind of struggle with is a kind of like if you're a RevOps person, like coming into your company and proving your value, sometimes it's very easy. I mean, we had a case, they just didn't clean out their marketing contacts in HubSpot and they had 130,000 marketing contacts that they didn't use. So that was, of course, very easy then to prove value because that was 8 to 10,000 euros saved per year. A lot of the time, it's not that easy. There is friction. The sales reps might be wasting 5-10% of every single day because of inefficient systems. There might be a ton of things going on, but a lot of the time, in my experience, it's quite hard to prove your impact. What are your thoughts there? Like, how would you go about doing that?
So, yeah, two suggestions that I have for that. Number one, document the status quo, right? Don't spend like hours writing down how a process looks like right now, unless you do need it to develop a better one from it. But it's sometimes as easy as taking a screenshot, right? Or writing down the pain points. Let's come back to the reps, right? I log in every day. I don't even know where my dashboards are, right? So if you're just writing down these simple things and then come back to them later on, it's very easy for you to compare how was the state when you started a certain project, how is it today? And especially in ops where you're kind of continuously developing, continuously deploying, it's often easily forgotten what it was like 12 months ago. And that's why I think it's super important that you're writing those things down, be it in a Notion, be it in a Confluence. Very similar actually to product management on the tech side, right? You're also writing down, hey, what was it right now? What's the expected outcome? Why are we now changing it? And I think that's something that I'm always preaching also to my RevOps teams to actually, because then to write that down, and because then they often also see, oh, wow, we actually do a lot of work. And then the second thing, especially in larger companies, try to do a simple back of the envelope calculation of what, well, maybe a 10% efficiency increase would mean on the sales side. And that often already is a good indication. It's probably not right when you measure it afterwards, but it gives you a good direction, right? Again, that's one of the learnings that you can take from product management as well, where it's very, very close. And that probably comes back to what you mentioned earlier, that your sales systems, your advisory as a RevOps team to the management is always also a product for the company.
Yeah, no, I guess the first one I like seeing it like a change log a little bit. So you kind
Absolutely.
of, because that's also communicating, because what a lot of companies or people forget is if you change the layout in the CRM because you did an update and none of the sales reps knew about this. All of a sudden they log in and everything changed and the stuff that they use are not there anymore because you had a good idea. And I've done that myself as well. And you kind of realize it after some time that that is actually quite disruptive. So
Yeah,
using that
and
and
by the
just
way,
informing people. Yeah.
sorry for
No,
interrupting,
no,
but
go
by
for
the way,
it.
for me, that's also the responsibility of a good RevOps leader, that you take this responsibility of making room for you and for your team to communicate what they are doing. And I actually just thought of this a second ago when you were talking about this, that whose responsibility is it? Is it the CEO's responsibility? Is it the CRO's responsibility? Is it the RevOps team's responsibility? And I think eventually it's the team's own responsibility to make room for them and for the other teams to know what they are doing. So when you're getting a question, hey, what are you actually working on? That probably is already a symbol or a symptom that you haven't done a good job in communicating to your stakeholders what you're responsible for and what you're doing.
Yeah. Or you get questions about like what is this lead score thing or what is this new stuff that you set up here? Like if you get a lot of questions with that, like it's not enough to say it once. Like that's one of my big like learnings from the past few years is like you can have a one-to-one training session with a rep. Don't assume that they just got it after that because you did a lot of setup, you've been sitting with this for a month, maybe tweaking, designing, and they're just seeing it and they don't really care. Like They care about hitting their number. They don't care about all your cool stuff that you did if it's not helping their job. So as you said in the beginning there's no such thing as over communication. And I think with this kind of stuff, that is so important.
And I think there's also never the case that this is only about what the reps are seeing, right? I'm actually thinking when I'm speaking about this more about the strategic impact. And you notice maybe that I'm trying to pull RevOps out of the only systems corner, right? Because also when communicating to your CEO and you're maybe telling them about the long-term vision, also they need to know what you're doing, because otherwise they are also the first people to question, hey, am I actually investing my money wisely to have, well, maybe 10 people sitting in ops? And you need to show them what you're doing, why you're doing this, and how it impacts their life, and come into more a proactive state of RevOps.
Mm. You know, that's also the impact part that I'm a really big proponent of, like just making sure that whatever you're doing, and of course looking at the impact in the ultimately, if you cannot prove that the stuff you're doing is actually making them more money or saving them some money, like it's not going to be something that is going to be invested in long term.
Yeah.
But no, I would argue that like the leadership team is also a user of the tool on a different layer, but they're also one of the users that need their stuff answered and their stuff done. And of course, like that's super, super important. So I totally
Absolutely.
agree that it's not just, like it's far, like the tool for me is one of the final pieces. It's not where you start. It's when you have all the other pieces, you pick the tool for the job, and you probably should have less tools and less automation initially
Yeah.
until you really know what you're doing. So I totally agree that that's not what RevOps, it's part of what it's about, but it's not all of what it's about.
Exactly. And the communication that brings you also in this role as a trusted advisor, because if people are knowing why you're doing certain things, hey, why we are changing our sales process right now, it has been running for the last 5 years in a good way. Why are we changing our order input, for instance? But if you're communicating that, for instance, the numbers that finance uses are not reliable, and that they spend maybe 8 man days each month on consolidating your numbers from sales because it just didn't make sense and they couldn't use it. Oh, that actually makes sense then to also a senior stakeholder, right? Because, well, 8 working days a month, that's almost half of a month, basically half of salary that you could save if you're reducing the work there, if you're automating there.
Yeah, and especially now, what you said before, you can't have a podcast episode about without talking a little bit about AI. I think like you see that in a lot of companies that we are turning towards those kind of smaller, more efficient teams, which is probably also why more companies would invest earlier, because if you are focusing on efficiency and kind of like even like a lot of sales teams now are trying with their kind of autonomous SDRs and all that kind of things that's coming. So, and if you don't have good data, if you don't have process alignment, if you don't have that kind of stuff, it's also going to be harder to leverage new technology because your data is garbage. You know, your systems doesn't work. The sales reps don't follow a process, and it's kind of going to make everything worse in the end. Let's go a little bit more philosophical here, Alexander, like ending on the kind of not specifically RevOps here, but reflecting on your kind of your journey. You're kind of running your own thing now. You know, you've been doing RevOps, working at different companies, doing a lot of things. What's something that you've learned along the way that had a big impact on you?
Yeah. So one thing, right, that I already mentioned is this communication part. That's definitely something that I had to learn also the hard way, right? You get questioned, then why are you not, or what are you actually doing? What are you working on? And another thing is focus. Focus on the things that are most important for you in this function, and try to get support if you can't find that focus yourself. What I mean with that, it doesn't mean that every one of us should run to a therapist right now, but it should actually mean that maybe sometimes it's helpful to get advice from an outside person, right? That's not necessarily somebody outside your company. That can also be somebody sitting in a different department that you're just every now and then sharing your roadmap with. And with such a roadmap, you're also easily driving your own focus. So maybe summarizing, get focus. If you can't get it yourself, try to get support in that, ask people who've done it before. And third, try to communicate where your focus is at and why you're not doing other things. So those were just some of the learnings that I can always give to somebody, and that were really helpful also to me.
Yeah, no, I think the focus bit, like knowing what to focus on and finding a way to actually stay aligned with that focus and not just putting your annual goal in place and then not looking at it for another year and coming back 1 year later and said, well, that was great. Too bad I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I really like the one you mentioned there with I said like the get help. Yeah, not as a maybe therapy, if you need that, go for it. But more in the I really find it powerful to share what am I doing with other people. And also we have that internally, for example, that people know that in the morning between 7 and 11, I have my focus blocks. So ideally, unless something is burning, mornings are headset on focus session, afternoon meetings and stuff like that. And if you as a team can kind of help each other and also realize how disruptive it can be, if you come with a strategic question to someone, like you're probably going to think about it after, and you might actually have stolen an hour, and that might not be wrong, but it makes it very hard to focus sometimes.
Absolutely. And actually, that reminds me of an anecdote. I was once working with a CEO. He used something that he called the focus tree, and it was basically a tree, really pictured on a PowerPoint slide, where you would add the fruits on. And the fruits were kind of the tasks, the projects that you're working on, and the different branches of the tree, they were your major project. And he actually had each of his direct reports share that once a month. And now you would think, why are they doing this? That's like in kindergarten. But believe me, this drove adoption, it drove communication, and it drove really alignment across the whole organization, because he asked the CMO, he asked the CFO, he asked the VP RevOps and his CRO to really show what are they working on and share it with the others. And believe me or not, but there were so often cases where other people said, oh, you're working on that as well? I didn't know. We actually had the plan as well, even on that level, right? So, and now believe what it looks like, because it goes down, right? The organization, there will be departments who basically don't even know other people working on the other side of the company, almost on the same stuff. But if you drive this adoption on the C-level discussion, then it's super good for you to drive alignment throughout the company.
No, I agree. Like, and I think with a lot of things, alignments, they gotta be buy-in from the top, and it gotta be somehow also driven a little bit from top, not just from. But what was it? Focus tree? It was called a focus tree. I'm gonna search for it afterwards. Awesome, Alexander. Let's leave it at that for today. So really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me very early today. But yeah, we made it. So in terms of kind of where can people find out more about you? Like, is it LinkedIn? Are you a big YouTuber? Like Instagram? What's
Yeah, of course, like follow me on LinkedIn, search for me. If you don't find me straight away, look for revenue enablement, and you will certainly find me on LinkedIn. I'm super happy to connect. Also, if you have any questions, do reach out.
awesome? Yeah, we're also gonna add a little bit of links and videos, like under the videos and stuff like that. So it's just a click there if you want to connect with Alexander. So yeah,
Perfect.
real pleasure talking to you today. And yeah, have
Same
a
here.
great
Thank you,
rest of your
Andreas.
day.